Hey guys, so today we're going to talk a little bit about GDPR. So let's get into it. So the other day I had this question about GDPR, and just one of my subscribers or my viewers wanted to just have a little bit of a chat about it and just get my perspective on the law. And for those of you who may not know that, or if you're not living within the EU, GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. And basically what it means is that it's a very similar regulation to the same thing that we've had for most forms of, storing people's personal data. And the idea is, in essence, because I won't go into every single detail of this law, I'll just try to focus on how it affects us programmers, and also how there's a bit of I have an interesting hypothesis. But first and foremost, what it in essence is that it forces you as the holder, and remember, this is not just in IT, guys, this affects absolutely every company out there. So the idea is that you have to be transparent with the purpose of why you're storing somebody else's personal information. You also have to, on their request, and when you actually ask for the consent to do this, explain to the user, the person that you're storing the information you're storing, that person, you have to inform them that you're actually doing this and why you're doing it, and also what you're actually storing. So a consumer of your application, say, needs to be able to, at any time, they should be able to export their information. They should be able to, on request, tell you that, hey, I want to know what you know about me, and you have to give that information to them. And they are also going to require you to forget someone. So if I tell, say, Google, I want you to forget me, then they are expected to forget all the information that they have on me. Now this affects not just things at the application level, it also affects logging, for example, which is it's a small little piece some developers don't really think about when they implement this sort of regulation in their system. Because logging information, I mean, if you're logging out somebody's personal information, that has to go too. And there are other things such as, okay, what purposes are you going to use the information for? How much information can you store? Because that's also regulated. I mean, if you're selling somebody, I don't know, if you're shipping products to a consumer, then you may need their address and their personal, like their name and stuff of that nature, but you should not have information about, I don't know, their cousins or like their closest family, that sort of thing. So this touches on quite a few layers, and it's actually a very complicated thing to get right. It forces us as the application developers to take quite a bit of a think about how we structure an application and how we actually store data and all that stuff. And being compliant has been the number one priority for basically every single business for the past few months. You may have encountered this if you're living as I do in Europe, by having an avalanche of emails going out explaining that, hey, we're storing your information, please give us your consent to store that information, and so forth, from various different companies. So this is a big deal. But what I think is interesting about this law is it makes sense. I'm not going to dispute it. I don't have a personal opinion on whether or not this is good or bad. It's just, let's just say that it's a little bit of a hassle to go through logs these days when you can't really tell who a person is. That's why I urge people to use structured logging and maybe using the user ID to track a user within the system instead, so it's easier to kind of sim through and go through things and kind of figure out what the user is actually doing in the system. Guys, it's not because I'm interested in what you're doing in your personal time. It's just that if an application that I built is not behaving the way that you want, I need some way to figure out how we got to that point. It's not malicious. I'm not trying to hack you or anything like that. Very few programmers who work for respectable companies are. But what I think is interesting is YouTube Premium. Why do I think YouTube Premium is interesting? Well, Because I have this hypothesis or this theory. You see, let me just give you an example first and foremost. There is one of the hottest companies here in Sweden is called Truecaller. Now the basic principle of this company is that you have an application on your phone and you share, by just installing that and putting it on your phone, you share your personal contacts. In other words, the information of every person that you have stored on your phone with their system. And in return, when somebody calls you, they will tell you who is calling, because they, by this very natural organic growth system, it's almost like a web that kind of spreads, right? They can store all that information and basically just tell you who's calling you. So it grows as more users add the application to their phone, the bigger their network and the bigger their databases or data stores with just phone numbers is, which is great if you have a problem which we have here in Sweden, where there's a lot of people just calling you to scam you or just calling you for whatever reason. Now, as you can imagine, this is a bit of a problem when they're not legally allowed to do this. Because if you think about it, they are not legally allowed to store information about other people. Maybe you gave them consent, but you did not give them consent for all the other people that they are now storing. That's a bit of a bind for them. But the idea, that's not really what's interesting. The interesting part is that now, all that information that they have stored, I don't really know how they're going to solve this one, but that information they are now forced to provide as an exportable thing. They need to basically legally allow somebody else, a person who owns that data, to see that data. The same thing goes for Google, Facebook, and all these other companies. Now, what is the main revenue stream for these companies, specifically Google and Facebook and so forth? Ads. And ads are based on personal information. Google and their data silos, where they have all this information about you and all your behavior on the web, and all this information they're storing on you, is to create good ad relevancy. That's the main benefit that they have from storing all this information. But what happens when you now have to be, they legally have to be able to export this information and just show what they have in their data stores to whoever asks for it, as long as it's their content. Now you may not think that that's a problem, but what happens if a company such as Truecaller in this scenario, or a very similar type of company, comes along and says, hey, we can build an application such as this application I was telling you about, where there's an incentive for you to share that information, because Truecaller has an incentive system. If you give away your personal information and all the things that, all the contacts on your phone, we will give you information about who's calling you for free. That's an incentive system. So you give away your personal information for some type of benefit. What would happen if the same thing was true for GDPR exports? What if there was an incentive system for you, or in a very convenient way for you, to get some type of a reward for exporting everything that Google knows about you? And what if that ever came to a point where it was a mass consumable? What if, and this is the thing that I find interesting, what if these massive super companies such as Google and Facebook and so forth no longer had exclusive rights to the data they have collected? What if their entire business model about gathering information about you, storing that and selling that to the highest bidder, what if the actual value of that kind of dropped because there are other companies out there who are quote unquote have more of a parasite type of role, where they do the work, they use their platforms to gather all the information, and they sit as second-hand consumers providing some value to the people that the bigger companies are gathering information on, and then these people just give away that data. That's a scary thought, and that's why I think Google Premium is an interesting thing. That's why I think that this is, and same thing for Facebook. I wonder, just have no proof for this, but I think the two are connected. I think that this law has a bigger impact than what people actually expect. Have a great day.